Sarah Ferguson makes a major social media change after her ex, Prince Andrew, gives up his royal title.
After years of scandal, second chances, and endless troubles, Sarah Ferguson is now facing the hardest chapter of her life. Once the fiery Duchess of York, she's reportedly on the edge of a nervous breakdown after losing the one thing that defined her royal identity. What really pushed Sarah to this point? And why is the palace so determined to keep the truth under wraps? Join us as we uncover the explosive details behind Sarah Ferguson's emotional fall. Sarah Ferguson's shocking fall. After 4 decades of being known as the Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson made a tiny change online that immediately got people talking. Her official social media pages no longer carried her royal title. Since Prince Andrew had announced he wouldn't use his own titles just 4 days earlier, her move seemed like a simple follow-up. But to those who really knew her, it was the moment her whole world cracked open. Inside Royal Lodge, the huge Windsor home she still shared with Andrew, you could cut the air with a knife. Sarah had always clung to that title. It was more than a formality. It was her identity, her brand, and her lifeline to a lifestyle she had fought tooth and nail to keep, even after the divorce. According to insiders, she spent the entire morning pacing between rooms, phone glued to her hand, her eyes red raw from crying as messages of shock poured in. The woman everyone knew for her resilience seemed completely undone, and the reason why she reacted like this will leave you emotional. Stay glued as we break it down. For years, Sarah had rebuilt her image piece by piece, writing books, doing TV spots, reinventing herself as a speaker. Everything she did as the Duchess of York. That title carried weight, opened doors, and earned her millions from partnerships and charity work. Losing it wasn't just symbolic, it was the total collapse of her career foundation. Friends described her struggling to breathe through tears, simply unable to accept that her royal link had broken for good. According to sources close to her, she begged Andrew to reconsider when she first learned he had agreed to give up his titles. But the decision was out of his hands. King Charles had made it crystal clear. The time for exceptions was over. The crown just couldn't carry the burden of the scandal linked to the York name anymore. The fallout was instant. Family members were summoned to Royal Lodge for what palace insiders later called one of the most emotional meetings in recent royal memory. What many may not know is that hours before the gathering, Princess Beatrice arrived, her face pale and drawn, no makeup, hair in a loose tie. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept at all. Seeing her parents in such a state broke her completely. She'd come hoping to calm things down, but walked right into a hurricane. The atmosphere inside the house was heavy. Long-buried tensions between Sarah and Andrew exploded into the open. Accusations, regrets, and years of resentment poured out all at once. Shouting echoed through the halls, servants stayed far away, and even the family dogs seemed anxious. It was the picture of a family truly breaking apart. But that wasn't all. At one point, Andrew admitted he'd agreed to the decision under direct royal pressure. He just hadn't wanted to drag his daughters through another round of horrible headlines. To him, giving up the title was damage control. To Sarah, it felt like a total betrayal. It was the final cut after years of standing by him through every scandal. She felt blindsided and humiliated, stripped of the one thing that had given her purpose since her marriage back in 1986. By evening, things at Royal Lodge quieted down, but the damage was done. Sarah locked herself away, refusing to talk to anyone except her sister on the phone. Those close to her said she looked lost, almost vacant, as if part of her identity had simply vanished with that title. The weight of losing that one word, Duchess, had become unbearable. Rumors started to spread around Windsor over the next few days. Palace aides spoke carefully about her state of mind, but many feared she was close to a breakdown. For the first time, there was no public defense. No quick bounce-back plan, no sign of the fiery optimism that used to define her. The woman who had outlasted scandal after scandal finally seemed defeated. As the gates of Royal Lodge closed to the world, a new kind of silence settled in. Behind those walls, a royal story was ending, not with a huge scandal or an affair, but with the quiet collapse of a woman who had built her entire life around a title. What came next for Sarah Ferguson depended on one thing. Could she actually live without it? Keep watching because the story is just getting started. Sarah Ferguson's daughter's reactions. According to royal observers, King Charles had plans to shield Beatrice and Eugenie from any more public embarrassment. As good as this sounds, the message was loud and clear. The York family unity was over. They were now just a collection of people in quiet distress. The king was trying to draw a line to protect his nieces from their parents' troubles, but it only deepened the family troubles. Andrew's decision to give up his title without even speaking to his daughters first left them stunned. Both of them found out about the announcement from the news, not from him. Within their circles, the shock was described as personal and bitter. Beatrice, who had always tried to be the bridge between her parents and the rest of the royals, felt deeply betrayed. Eugenie, who was more emotional and protective of her mother, refused to take part in the family meeting at all. To her, the entire scene at Royal Lodge was too painful to face. The day after the meeting, Beatrice was seen driving out of Royal Lodge in her black Range Rover, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses. Photographers captured the image, and it said everything. A young woman torn between loyalty to her parents and a growing fear of what their mistakes might cost her own life. Meanwhile, outside the palace walls, the public mood shifted fast. Sympathy for Sarah, once the royal underdog, began to fade as old controversies came back to light. Her name was again linked to the email scandal that had embarrassed the family years ago. With Andrew facing another round of damaging headlines, the Yorks were once again the symbol of royal excess gone wrong. The fallout was brutal and public. Charities that had once relied on Sarah's star power started to quietly cut ties. Julia's House, one of her long-term charities, removed her as patron. Within days, several others, including the Teenage Cancer Trust, followed. For organizations that depended on public goodwill, association with Sarah now carried risk. The woman who had once filled auditoriums for fundraisers was now being dropped one after another. The newspapers seized the story. Front pages described the York household as a crumbling dynasty caught in scandal. Reporters dissected every detail, from Sarah's emotional state to the tension between father and daughters. The tabloids compared her elegant public appearances from years past to her most recent withdrawn photos, painting a picture of decline that felt both invasive and final. Attention then turned toward Andrew's finances. And this is where the real shocker is. According to reports, Andrew occupies a 30-room royal lodge, a property that cost a fortune to maintain. Critics questioned how he managed to keep the estate with no visible source of income. Investigations began to look into his financial history, especially a mysterious payment of £8 million made in 2005 with no clear explanation of its source. As pressure grew, scrutiny extended to Beatrice and Eugenie. Their personal assets, once private, were now being examined for possible links to their father's former business contacts. Royal aides were said to have pushed for an internal review to ensure that the sisters' investments were free from any questionable influence. Even their professional achievements, built over years, were suddenly being doubted. For Beatrice, who had made a name for herself in private equity, and Eugenie, who managed a respected art gallery, the shift was painful. Both had worked to build independent identities, but now they were being dragged back into a storm they had no part in creating. Their royal names, once symbols of access and opportunity, had become heavy burdens. Inside Royal Lodge, silence replaced the usual noise of family life. The grand home that once hosted parties and laughter now felt cold and still. What began as a private family decision had turned into a public crisis. The York name, once linked with warmth and eccentric charm, now stood for loss, scandal, and confusion. The family was broken in ways that no royal ceremony could mend. The daughters were trying to live under the weight of scrutiny. Sarah was trapped in isolation, and Andrew's silence only deepened the unease around him. But the story is not over yet. We are about to reveal the mental and emotional toll on Sarah. Keep watching. Emotional and mental toll on Sarah Ferguson. Sarah Ferguson's world had never felt smaller. For years, she had been the royal family's wild card, the woman who could stumble, rise, and somehow charm the world back into her corner. But now, the spirit that once earned her the nickname the Phoenix had all but vanished. The public humiliation, the health scares, and the relentless wave of rejection had stripped her of nearly everything she once believed was hers. The headlines no longer called her Duchess or Fergie. They called her forgotten. Inside Royal Lodge, Sarah barely moved from her bedroom. Friends who visited said she had lost weight drastically and that her once lively voice was now faint, like she was struggling to find purpose in speaking at all. Meals were often left untouched, and her staff described a routine that had become a loop of silence, tears, and unanswered calls. Her sister, Jane Ferguson, flew in from Australia after hearing how serious things had become. Jane tried to lift her spirits, urging her to step outside or see a doctor, but nothing seemed to reach her. The same woman who once filled rooms with laughter now sat in her dressing gown for hours, staring out the window toward the gardens she no longer tended. Losing her charity patronages hit the hardest. For years, she had poured herself into causes for children and cancer awareness, raising millions through events and personal appearances. But one by one, the calls came in, informing her she was no longer needed. Julia's House, Teenage Cancer Trust, and several smaller foundations had quietly cut ties. Without those roles, Sarah lost the last pieces of her royal connection. She was no longer a duchess, no longer a figure of purpose, just a former royal living in a house that no longer felt like home. Her relationship with Prince Andrew, once her constant source of reassurance, had turned cold. His silence since losing his title left her feeling abandoned and exposed. Even though they still lived under the same roof, he was barely seen. Rumors spread that he was avoiding her out of guilt and fear of worsening the situation. The man who once promised her security now seemed like a stranger who shared her address but not her life. Beatrice and Eugenie visited often at first, bringing flowers and soft reassurances. But as the pressure on them grew, the visits became less frequent. Their husbands, Eduardo Mapelli Mozzi and Jack Brooksbank, reportedly urged them to keep their distance, worried that being too close to their mother might damage their own public image. The sisters tried to stay loyal, but also understood that, in the royal world, loyalty sometimes meant quiet absence. Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, there was no sign of compassion from the king. His advisors made it clear there would be no reconsideration of Andrew's status or of Sarah's place in the royal fold. The monarchy had to look forward, not back. For Sarah, that decree marked the end of an era. And though the world outside had already moved on, inside that house, Sarah was learning the hardest truth of all. Sometimes, a fall from grace is not a moment, but a long, slow fade. Thank you for staying with us. What are your thoughts about Sarah Ferguson's breakdown? Share your opinions with us in the comment section. If you enjoyed the video, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, click the following video on your screen, and you will enjoy it.